What's up guys, how's it going? We are back with another video. This time we are going to talk about a forgotten Selesnyan commander. But first, this one I want to dedicate to the kid at my local LGS who said that Selesnya is the worst color combination in all of Magic. just a shout. I'm not gonna say his name, but he knows who he is. So today we're going to be talking about Hamza. Hamza is an amazing commander, and before we get into the logistics and before we get into the stats and everything, I want to say that for everyone out there who actually is looking into playing a Hamza deck, please put Lathiel in your decks. Please, if you can fit it in, put it in, because Lathiel is in none of Hamza's decks, but Hamza is in Lathiel's decks. Just wanted to, put that out there. So with Hamza is an amazing commander, and we're going to get more into the introduction of Hamza at our detailed look in the next segment. But I don't know if, actually no, OBS will not show the scroll down, but there are only 2 decks in Hamza's themes for some reason. There's only +1/+1 counters and Elephant Tribal, which I find very disturbing, because even in the +1/+1 counter deck, there is a lot of ideas missing here that could benefit. Like it's like a splash of everything for +1/+1 counters, and it's not really tailored. Like there's a Hydra here in high synergy, but there's no Hydra themed deck. There's only 2 decks. So +1/+1 counters has 785 decks. Elephant Tribal has 45 decks. And I find that really weird, because Hamza basically reads affinity for creatures. So enough about this. Let's get into who Hamza is and what Hamza does. So in this one, we are going to cover Hamza and what makes Hamza good for the 2 ideas that I'm going to give you for him leading the deck. And then the 3rd segment, we're going to do Hamza and the 99. Before I get started, I want to say that my decks are not really to tell you how to play the commander, just more to give you ideas. Maybe it might spark your interest. Maybe it might be a commander you forgot about, because commanders were coming out like crazy, legendary creatures were coming out like crazy, sets dropping like crazy all over the place. Or maybe you saw it, you looked it up on EDHREC, and you went, I don't really like these decks, I want to do something different. That's what I'm here for. So we have Hamza. Hamza is a 6-drop commander, 4 colorless, a green and a white. It's a legendary creature, elephant warrior. And it reads, well, I'm going to paraphrase it because it's the same thing both times, but it's just like Mycosynth Golem. If you don't know what Mycosynth Golem is, it's a golem that gives affinity for artifacts. But Hamza does the same thing, but for creatures with +1/+1 counters. So for the amount of creatures that have +1/+1 counters, you can summon Hamza from your command zone for minus that many creatures you have with +1/+1 counters. So him going from 4 will go down to just 2. He'll just be a green and a white if you have 4 creatures with +1/+1 counters on them. Then while he's on the field, every creature in your hand that you want to cast costs generic less for each creature on the field with a -1/-1 counter. So the comparison between Hamza and Mycosynth Golem is very similar, because they both do the exact same thing. They minus the cost for creatures, and they also minus the cost for themselves. The only difference is Hamza's a legendary creature, where Mycosynth Golem is not. The reason why I was bringing up Lathiel earlier is because Lathiel helps put those +1/+1 counters on creatures, and it also gives you an extra, lifelink strategy if you want to go that route. But getting into Hamza being with Mycosynth Golem, artifacts are the first archetype that I want to talk about, because Hamza is already minusing that generic cost. And what do you have with artifacts? You have really big artifacts. You know, when you think about big mana, most people forget that artifacts exist. You have Mycosynth Golem, you have Blightsteel, you have Darksteel, you have Metalworks Colossus. You know, the list goes on of Golem. So you could do Golem Tribal with Hamza, and with Golem Tribal, or even just artifacts, but with Golem Tribal, you have many different ways to give those artifacts +1/+1 counters. You have Steel Overseer, which is an artifact creature that taps and puts a +1 counter on all artifact creatures you control. You have Feldar Retreat, which is an enchantment that whenever you play a land, it puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and gives it vigilance for the turn. There are plenty of different ways to make this deck with artifacts. Plus, you can just have a bunch of mana dorks until, you know, you really need something. But then there's also other cards in artifacts and artifact creatures, like creatures with modular. Modular is where they enter the battlefield. I'll put an example up on the screen. They enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter equal to their modular number. So it'll say modular 1, they get a +1/+1 counter. It says modular 2, you know, they get 2 +1/+1 counters, etc. Then you also have Fabricate. Fabricate was also another way for creatures to come in with +1/+1 counters, or you could create 1/1 colorless servo tokens. So as far as artifacts go, you have lots of ways to do this. And if you focus on golems, and the reason why I'm saying golems over just random artifact creatures in general, I mean, you can do the random artifact creatures because of modular and fabricate and stuff like that. But the reason why I say go with the golems is because they have support with their splicers. I'll put some of the examples up on screen. They have splicers that are artificers that when they enter the battlefield, they create a 3/3 golem token, and then they give all golems some type of effect. Like the white ones can give first strike and something else. It'll be on the screen. The green ones give regenerate and trample, and so that goes to all golems. And like I said before, Mycosynth Golem is a golem. You know, you have Darksteel Colossus, which is a golem. If you have the money, or you have a Blightsteel Colossus, that too counts as a golem, because Blightsteel is just Darksteel with Infect. You know, and then you have other things that can help you out in those colors of green and white. You have draw cards. You know, you have all the enchantments like Garruk's Uprising, Colossal Magistry, Elemental Bond, etc., for draw, because you're playing these big, you know, artifact creatures. Plus you have instant draw spells, you know, of course, like Shamanic Revelation. You know, we all know the good green draw cards, not too hard to look them up. But also you have protection. So where artifacts have other artifacts that give them indestructible, flying, haste, vigilance, you know, protection from stuff like Akroma's Monument. You also have green-white protection with hexproof, like Archetype of Endurance, privileged positions that give all your permanents hexproof. Then you also have other cards that can help you out, like Seaborn Muse to untap all your permanents. And you have Unwinding Clock to untap all your artifacts, which there are artifact lands as well. Then you have Mycosynth Lattice, Karn if you want to lock down your opponents. You know, Hamza, as far as artifacts go, is going to get you all the good artifact creatures that you could ever want. All you got to do is just put +1 counters on whatever comes in, and you're literally giving everything, you know, affinity for artifacts. Pretty much, you're giving affinity for artifact creatures. So with that, I'm pretty sure where we could go to next with this idea. The next idea is pretty much the same, but in a different theme. So following the same theme of colorless creatures to reduce colorless cost, if you haven't figured it out already, Hamza is really good for Eldrazi. Eldrazi's have tons of colorless creatures. The Eldrazi Titans, which are, you know, just as scary as Blightsteel Colossus, if not more scary, depending on your playgroup or, you know, how you build it. But the thing about Eldrazi is people already fear them for what they are. if you start adding +1 counter synergies with Eldrazi, that makes them even scarier. You know, can you think about a Ulamog that's coming at you that's like a 2020, you know, that you're dropping for free, you know, a Kozilek and all that stuff, you know, that's pretty scary. So with Eldrazi, you know, they also have their own mana dorks. They have their own synergies with their Eldrazi spawn and mana ramping. You know, you're pretty much building the same thing as the artifacts, except you're just subbing out the artifact creatures for the Eldrazi and the Eldrazi support. I don't really have to talk too much about this idea just because, I mean, it's already a given. You know, if you know Eldrazi's, there's not too much to talk about. But it's amazing how Eldrazi's do not show up under Hamza's deck list. No one either thought to do it or people forgot about Hamza. Hamza did come out during the Commander Legends set, so it's really easy to forget about a lot of the commanders that came in that set. But as far as like big mana Eldrazi commanders, or even just commanders that give a large amount of cost reduction, Hamza should not be forgotten. And I hate to do such a short segment on Eldrazi, but you know, like I said, they kind of speak for themselves. You know, they're their own tribe. They're very powerful. We all know what they can do. I'm just gonna put like all the Eldrazi cards one at a time. That, you know, just to give an idea, like, you know, all the Titans are, you know, 10, 11, 12, 13. Which can be dropped for free with Hamza because you can have the Eldrazi spawn with +1 tokens on them, you know, which is something that a lot of people don't really think about. They just think about them as using them as mana dorks that sacrifice. But if you start putting +1 counters on those Eldrazi spawn, using them to reduce the cost of the Eldrazi Titans and the other bigger Eldrazi, and then attacking with those Eldrazi spawn, now you're just assembling a token army versus just having a bunch of mana rocks, you know, laying around, since that's pretty much, you know, all they would be used for. You know, changing the perspective on how we play a lot of these cards and a lot of these decks, a lot of these strategies could help us progress and do something different. Or it might be that edge we need to, you know, maybe, you know, upgrade from being lower tier in our play circle or our meta in our local area and moving up to, like, you know, mid to high tier where we could be doing other things that other people haven't thought of, or maybe things that people didn't think of because they weren't really paying attention to it, you know? So for the last segment, we're going to go into Hamza and the 99. All right, so just something I got to bring up. Hamza is, like I said, very versatile. If you can put +1 counters on creatures, then you can cast stuff for free. Something that I forgot to mention with the artifact creatures is that there's also Cascade. For those of you who may be aware of the recent Cascade that came out, there were a lot of green creatures that had Cascade, and they were pretty big. You know, like Apex Devastator, I think it was called, should be up on screen. And Maelstrom Colossus, which was an artifact, you know, and other big creatures and dinosaurs that had Cascade either like once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. There were a couple artifacts that had Cascade on them and some enchantments that had Cascade, and they were in green. So with Hamza, while Hamza may not be the ideal version or legendary to run a green-white Cascade deck, it's still something to think about, where if you can get Cascade and get those really big creatures, like Maelstrom Colossus is an 8-drop, but it would be for free with Hamza if your creatures have +1 counters. So then you're just, you know, you're cascading for 8, you know, for 7 or less. And then with like Apex Devastator, etc., that could really benefit you in doing that. Some other things that Hamza would be good for would be enchantments, and that's kind of something that people don't really look into a lot. But when you're in green-white, enchantments work with almost everything. Like as I mentioned earlier, Privileged Positions, which is a enchantment that gives all other permanents hexproof. Feldar's Retreat. Every time a land comes in, it gives all creatures a +1/+1 counter and vigilance to the end of the turn. You know, it's enchantments like that that can really do something. And when you have a creature, oh crap, give me a second. I just lost it. There we go. When you have a creature like Citizen Champion, I hope I said that right. Citizen Champion is a human warrior, 3-drop, 2 colorless, 1 green. Human warrior. It has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Citizen Champion. I'm gonna butcher that name. And draw a card. You know, when you think about stuff like that, that's a creature that's putting +1/+1 counters on itself, and it's drawing you cards. And then you have creatures like the unicorns, which focus on lifelink. And in green and white, you have a lot of enchantments that can get you lifelink. So when you have Lathael, the unicorn, and you have a couple of the other unicorns that focus on when you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, you know, that becomes something where maybe Hamza's not at the front of that deck, but Hamza could be in the 99, or vice versa. You know, maybe he could be at the front and then you put auras on him to protect him, you know, and then you put auras on other stuff, and then you're swinging with, you know, a bunch of creatures that normally would be too weak to live, but you have creatures with Constellation who are giving you draw to dig into your deck faster, who are giving +1/+1 counters. As we saw with Siona from the human tribal deck, you know, she gives you more creatures, more human creature tokens, which you could put +1/+1 counters on to just sort of rapid fire through your deck to where you're just, you know, rapidly dropping cards for like 1 or 2 mana, and then, you know, or even for free if you're mixing in other things with it that are colorless. That's something that's all creative. You know, you have a lot of options when it comes to cards like that. Big mana is another thing that I've been thinking about for a while too. When it gets into +1/+1 counter synergies, you know, there's so many things you could do. You could either go with Hydras. Hamza would be a great Hydra commander, but at the same time, he would also be good at, or he or she would be good in the 99. Because when you think about Hydras, most of them are X spells, and if they're not X spells, they're usually like 1 or 2 green with 4 or 6 colorless, and then it's 1 or 2 green with like X or XX. And with Hamza, the Hydras are already putting +1 counters on themselves. Most of them are, and a large majority of them are. And the ones that aren't, you could always put on the aura. Again, another aura for an enchantment. What is it? The Hydra one? I forgot what it's called. It'll be on the screen. I'll find it. But you can always do stuff like that. So with Hydras, they're giving themselves +1 counters. There are other cards that there was an enchantment. I forgot what it's called. I saw it recently. I'll find it, hopefully. Where it, instead of taking damage, your creatures receive +1/+1 counters instead. That's another thing for Hamza, you know, where you can add that in as a tech. With a lot of the creatures you could be playing something like Cryptolith Right, which could be turning all those, you know, all those creatures that come in with +1 counters, like the Fabricate creatures, the modular creatures. They're coming in with +1/+1 counters, but then you have cards like Cryptolith Right, which could make them tap for mana. You know, like there are tons of things that you can do when it comes to not just +1 counter synergies, but just cost reduction in general. If there's a will, there's a way. And when you have affinity for +1 counters, which is what Hamza is, then you have to start thinking outside the box. You know, if you add him in a Bant deck where Bant still gets +1 counters, but you use, let's say, Merfolk Bant, or you use Landfall of some kind where you're getting bonuses, you know, or whenever a land enters the battlefield, you get a life, and that translates into a +1/+1 counter somehow. There are just so many options out there, more than just playing a card, it gets a +1/+1 counter, you move on, you know, because with all that life gain, that can result in just shooting a player to kill them. With the crap, I am losing it today. I'm sorry, I don't feel well. I'm trying to do this like while I'm sick. I can't remember the artifact, but I'm gonna put it up on the screen. The artifact where you can pay 50 life to shoot any target, like creature, player, you know what I'm talking about. You could just Death Star someone with all that extra life gain, or you could go with the other Feldar, the cat, where if you have +40 life, you win the game. So there are win cons other than just casting big creatures, but you have that option where if you're playing a Tulane deck, let's say, Hamza being in the deck could give you a little more focus than just play creatures, draw cards, play lands. It could be specifically to, you know, get those landfalls, like I was saying before, gain life with Feldar's Retreat, put those +1 counters on, and then you're just rapid firing creatures, and then, you know, eventually ending with Laboratory Maniac to, you know, finish off your deck, because you can just draw through your entire deck. You know, like, there are a lot of ways that you can use Hamza. And the weather is crazy right now, holy crap. But Hamza is a very unique commander, and I think people just forgot about Hamza in general when it comes to all the commanders that came out in that set, and then just with all the commanders that there are, it's nice to see that there are like 700 plus decks for +1/+1 counters. But it's like, what about the other ideas? You know, you have +1/+1 counters, but what about Hydra Tribal? You know, what about Unicorn Tribal? I don't think that's a thing. I don't think we have that many unicorns, but, you know, what about Angel Tribal? How about that? Hamza as an Angel commander, because he's reducing the cost of those really high angels and making them 2 white, 1 white, you know, and then you're gaining life. You're creating more angels. Something that, you know, you could do Angel Tribal like that. Bam, there's another idea. Angel Tribal with Hamza. See, it's like, once you start really processing what Hamza's effect does, affinity for +1 counters, you can do so much with that. Whether if he's in a 5-color deck, you know, whether if it's just 2 colors, 3 colors, as long as there's green and white, or you're using Abzan, you know, it just says cast creatures. It doesn't even say from the hand. So if you wanted to cast creatures from your graveyard and you want to add black in there somehow and play Abzan, because I think Hamza is an Abzan creature. The background of his art, if you can see it, looks very Abzan. But if you start adding in Abzan like Kaldor, where you can cast creatures from your graveyard, if you're casting them from the graveyard, it specifically, I think it says cast, if you're casting them, then their cost is reduced by the creatures that you have +1 counters on the field for. That's crazy, you know. Also, if you can cast creatures from exile, or if you can cast creatures off the top of your deck, think about that for a second. If you're casting creatures off the top of your deck, there are quite a few cards that let you look at the cards on the top of your deck, and if it's a creature, you can cast it. Well, imagine that if you're just casting it for 2, or if you're playing artifacts, you know, or Eldrazi's. You know, one of the Vivians allows you to do that. The Vivian Planeswalkers. There are a couple other creatures that allow you to look at the top card of your deck and cast creatures from the top of your deck. So even in the humans, the new green-white humans, there was a new one in Midnight Hunt that allows you to do that after I think it was with Coven or something. But yeah, like I said, there's so many things. I could go on for like an hour just coming up with ideas for Hamza, because Hamza is that good, and I don't want to say like people are severely forgetting, you know, this great commander, but you know, sometimes commanders fall through the cracks, or just between announcements, rapid fire announcements of different sets, And Hamza is definitely worth looking at, especially if you love playing heavy creature decks, or you like playing big mana decks, or you like Hydras or Eldrazi's, artifact creatures. You know, there are other things, like think of a creature type. Dinosaurs are in green and white. You know, like think of something that's really big. Dragons are usually big. Green white dragons like Dragon Lord Dramoka, you know, and other white dragons and green dragons. We already said angels. You know, like Abzan. If you go with Abzan, you could play Demon Tribal, because then you could be giving lifelink to stuff and then casting demons for just like 2 or 3, or even, you know, most demons are like 2 black. So if you're in Abzan, you could be casting them for just 2 black. Imagine that. Like, that's crazy. So, you know, the possibilities are endless. It's literally just affinity for +1 counters. Take it, run with it, and have fun. Don't kill your friends too much. But that's it for me. I think I've given you guys enough ideas. I'm really excited about this commander, and after, I think it's been a year since it's been out, to see only 2 different types of themes kind of just made me sad, and that's why I wanted to do this video. So for this week, I'm gonna try to do these every week. I'm not gonna try to do them every day. I think that would be just flooding my channel if I tried to do them every day. So I'm gonna try to do these videos once a week. Hamza is our star of the week. And may the games begin. See y'all later. Peace.